In the spring of 2020, when the world stood still in fear of an invisible enemy, I chose to escape. The suffocating silence of isolation wasn't what haunted me most. It was the constant judgment that followed me everywhere I went. A mistake at work had left me shunned, whispered about in every corner of my life. To find peace, I packed my gear and headed to the Rocky Mountains, seeking solace where human voices couldn't reach me. The national park was eerily quiet. The pandemic had scared most people away, leaving the trails empty. I found comfort in the solitude, the crisp mountain air a balm for my frayed nerves. After a day of hiking, I found the perfect spot to pitch my tent by a creek. The sound of rushing water was hypnotic, drowning out the noise in my head. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. As night fell, the world around me turned to ink. The only light came from the faint glow of my campfire and the stars scattered across the sky. I sat by the fire, eating a simple meal, my phone lying forgotten on a nearby rock. There was no signal up here, and for once, I was glad. It was liberating to disconnect from the chaos I had left behind. When I finally picked up my phone to check the time, I noticed a notification. A text message. Confused, I opened it. "How's the camping trip going?" I froze. My fingers hovered over the screen, a cold chill creeping down my spine. There was no name attached to the number, just an unfamiliar string of digits. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone from work trying to apologize, or maybe it was a wrong number. Still, my heart raced as I typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came almost immediately. "Just someone who loves the mountains too." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. It was unsettling, but not necessarily threatening. Perhaps it really was a wrong number. I put the phone down and tried to shake off the unease, blaming my overactive imagination. The wind rustled through the trees, and the creek gurgled softly. Everything was fine, I told myself. But everything wasn't fine. Another message came through. "Nice spot by the creek. You've got good taste." My blood ran cold. My eyes darted around the darkness, searching for movement. There was nothing, just shadows and the occasional glint of moonlight on the water. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the trees, the beam trembling in my unsteady hand. The forest was silent now, unnaturally so. I texted back, my hands shaking. "Where are you? What do you want?" The reply came after a long pause, and it made my stomach drop. "Turn off your light. You're ruining the view." Panic surged through me as I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the night. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt eyes on me, watching, waiting. I stumbled back into my tent, zipping it up as if that thin layer of fabric could protect me. My gun was in my pack. I pulled it out, hands fumbling as I loaded it, the weight of the weapon barely comforting. Then, another message came. "Nice tent. Mind if I come in?" Attached was a photo. My tent, taken from just outside. I couldn't breathe. I threw the phone down and grabbed the gun, unzipping the tent just enough to peer out. The darkness was impenetrable, the trees looming like sentinels. My finger hovered over the trigger as I whispered into the void, "Stay away." "I'm armed." The silence was deafening, and then, footsteps. Quick, retreating, crunching through the underbrush. I raised the gun and fired 2 shots into the air, the sound shattering the stillness. The footsteps grew fainter, disappearing into the forest. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the dying fire, the gun clutched tightly in my hands, flinching at every rustle and creak. The messages stopped, but the fear lingered, gnawing at me. When dawn finally broke, I packed up and left, my hands still trembling as I hiked back to the trailhead. Years later, I still think about that night. I've told the story to a few close friends, but most don't believe me. They think I was imagining things, that isolation and fear got the better of me. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Whoever or whatever was out there wasn't just a figment of my imagination. I still go camping sometimes, but I'm never alone, and I never forget to bring my gun. Every October, my family gathered at Uncle Jim's sprawling property in northern Michigan. It was a tradition that had been around longer than I could remember. The crisp autumn air, the crunch of leaves beneath our boots, and the warmth of the bonfire made it the highlight of our year. Uncle Jim's place was massive, a 4-acre slice of wilderness bordered by dense, towering trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. The forest beyond his property line, though, was always off-limits. Too thick, too wild, Uncle Jim would say. But that year, my brother Ellis, our cousins Nolan and Wyatt, and I had other plans. We were kids, aged between 9 and 13, and brimming with overconfidence. Our dads, having indulged in a little too much cider, cheered on our grand idea to camp out in the woods. "Let 'em toughen up," my dad had laughed, helping us haul the tent beyond the marked edge of the property. The moms weren't thrilled. They warned us about bears, coyotes, and other dangers lurking in the forest. But their protests were drowned out by our father's boisterous encouragement and our own eager chatter. By sunset, we had our tent set up in a clearing about 100 yards into the woods. The spot felt secluded but exciting, like we were real explorers. As the stars emerged, we zipped ourselves inside the tent, armed with flashlights, snacks, and a deck of Uno cards. The forest outside was alive with chirping crickets and rustling leaves. It felt peaceful, even cozy. We had just started our second round of Uno when we heard it. The first scream. It was distant, faint, almost like the cry of a fox. Nolan, the oldest and self-proclaimed nature expert, shrugged it off. "It's just an animal," he said, trying to sound casual. We nodded, pretending not to be rattled, and went back to our game. But a chill had settled over us. The second scream was closer, much closer. It didn't sound like a fox this time. It was sharp, high-pitched, and eerily human. We froze, cards in hand, staring at each other with wide eyes. "What was that?" Wyatt whispered, his voice trembling. No one answered. The crickets had stopped chirping, and the forest had gone unnaturally quiet. Ellis turned off his flashlight. "Shh," he hissed, his face pale in the faint glow of the moon filtering through the tent. We sat in the dark, straining to hear any sound over the pounding of our hearts. At first, there was nothing, just silence. And then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching through the leaves. Nolan reached for the zipper of the tent flap, his hand shaking. "Don't," I whispered, grabbing his arm. The footsteps were getting closer. Whoever, or whatever it was, they were heading straight for us. The scream that followed made my blood run cold. It was loud, raw, and unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was right outside the tent. The walls of the tent began to shake violently, as if something or someone was clawing at it. We screamed, a chorus of sheer terror, and bolted out of the tent. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We ran blindly through the woods, our flashlights bouncing wildly, our screams echoing in the darkness. The only thought in my mind was to get back to the house, back to safety. Branches scraped at my arms and roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't stop. None of us did. When we burst out of the forest and into the clearing near the house, our family was already outside, drawn by the sound of our cries. Our moms rushed to us, hugging us tightly, while our dads, confused and alarmed, tried to get us to explain. We were hysterical, shouting over each other about the screams, the footsteps, the tent shaking. "No one went out there," Uncle Jim said firmly, his face grim. "I've been here the whole time." Our dads grabbed flashlights and headed into the woods, determined to find the source of our terror. We waited, huddled together on the porch, shivering despite the blankets wrapped around us. When they returned nearly an hour later, they hadn't found anything. No tracks, No signs of an animal, nothing to explain what had happened. "It was probably just the wind," one of them said, though his tone lacked conviction. None of us believed it. How could we? We never camped in the woods again after that night. Even in daylight, the forest felt different, darker, heavier, like it was holding its breath. Whatever we had heard, whatever had shaken our tent, it stayed with us, a shadow in the back of our minds. To this day, when the leaves start to turn and the nights grow long, I can still hear that scream, echoing in the stillness. And I wonder if somewhere out there it's waiting. Two years ago, my father and I decided to go camping in a remote area of the Midwest, a place known for its breathtaking landscapes and deep-rooted Native American history. We had heard stories about the land, tales of its spiritual significance, and the strange experiences people sometimes had there. But we shrugged them off as just local lore. We wanted an escape from the city, a chance to reconnect with nature. The first night was perfect. The sky was a canvas of stars, the air crisp, and the forest alive with the gentle rustling of leaves. It was everything we hoped for. The second night was different. That morning, we stopped by the ranger station to check in, and the ranger casually mentioned that we were the only campers in the entire park. "Quiet time for us," he said with a chuckle, but something about his tone seemed off. My father and I exchanged a glance but didn't dwell on it. We spent the day hiking along the trails, marveling at the untouched beauty of the land. There was a certain stillness in the air, though, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. By the time we made our way back to the campsite, the sun was already dipping below the horizon. The walk back was unsettling. The forest, which had been so vibrant and inviting during the day, now felt oppressive. The air was thick, heavy. Every sound, every snap of a twig, every whisper of wind felt magnified, almost purposeful. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced we were being followed, though I saw nothing. My father, usually calm and composed, was silent. He had that look on his face, the one he got when he was deep in thought but didn't want to say what was on his mind. Back at the campsite, we lit a fire and tried to shake off the unease. We roasted marshmallows and played music from a small portable speaker. The familiar tunes helped a bit, but not much. The feeling of being watched lingered. I caught my father staring into the darkness beyond the firelight, his jaw tight. When I asked if he was okay, he just nodded and said, "It's probably nothing. Let's not worry." Then we heard it. A loud bang echoed through the trees, coming from the direction of the river about a quarter-mile away. It wasn't the sound of a branch falling or an animal moving. It was something deliberate, forceful. We froze, staring at each other, waiting for some explanation that never came. A few minutes later, another bang, closer this time. My father grabbed the flashlight and shone it into the forest, but the beam seemed swallowed by the darkness. We stayed quiet, listening. When the third bang came, it was unnervingly close, and the ground beneath us seemed to tremble slightly. "Get in the tent," my father said, his voice low and firm. We hurried inside, zipping it up as quickly as we could. Sitting there in the suffocating silence, the only sound was our breathing. Then it came again. A fourth bang, this time accompanied by a deep, vibrating hum that seemed to resonate in my chest. It wasn't just a sound. It was a sensation, like the air itself was alive and pressing down on us. My father whispered, "Stay still. Don't move." Through the thin fabric of the tent, I saw him turn his head sharply toward the entrance. His face went pale and his eyes widened. "What is it?" I whispered, barely able to get the words out. He held up a hand, signaling me to be quiet. I didn't dare look, but I could feel it. Something was out there. Something big. The ground shook slightly with every step it took. Then came the growl. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. low, guttural, and alien, like the sound was coming from deep within the earth itself. My whole body seized with fear. The vibrating hum grew louder, filling the air, filling me. My head started to spin, and before I could say or do anything, everything went black. When I woke up, it was morning. The sunlight was streaming into the tent, and for a brief moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. But then I looked at my father. He was sitting up, staring at his dead phone in his hands. Mine was dead too, despite being fully charged the night before. The fire had burned out completely, though we had doused it carefully before retreating to the tent. My father didn't say much as we packed up and left. He didn't need to. Whatever had happened that night, we both felt it. It wasn't just in our heads. We've never gone camping again. Even now, when I close my eyes at night, I can still feel that hum, hear that growl. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, I wonder, was it warning us or something worse?